What is happening right now in the Middle East is not just another foreign policy crisis. It is a full-scale military catastrophe unfolding in real time, and the American people deserve to understand exactly how deep this disaster runs. From the lies being told at the highest levels of government, to the troops being sent into what many military analysts are calling a meat grinder, to drone swarms breaching nuclear bomber bases on American soil, this story is bigger, more dangerous, and more consequential than almost anything being covered in mainstream media right now. We are going to break it all down, point by point, because the truth matters, accountability matters, and the lives of American service members matter. Stay with us. Donald Trump is now actively considering sending an additional 10,000 troops into the Middle East theater, and this decision alone should be setting off alarm bells across the entire country. This is not a small logistical adjustment. This is a dramatic, deliberate escalation of a war that was already stretched dangerously thin before this week even began. To understand the full scale of what we are talking about, consider that 5,000 troops had already been deployed in the most recent wave, joining a force of well over 50,000 American service members already positioned across air bases, Army installations, and naval vessels throughout the region. The units being discussed for this new deployment include some of the most elite and combat-ready forces in the entire United States military. We are talking about elements of the 82nd Airborne Division, the paratroopers, the Marine Expeditionary Units that were aboard the USS Tripoli, and additional naval assets still making their way from San Diego. When you send these kinds of units, you are not sending peacekeepers. You are sending warriors prepared for direct, sustained combat. The Pentagon itself is describing what comes next as a dramatic escalation, and that phrase should not be glossed over. Dramatic escalation in a war zone where the enemy has been preparing for 2 decades, has mined the waterways, dug trenches, and publicly stated they have 1 million soldiers ready to engage, is not a strategy. It is a catastrophe in motion. Every military family receiving those deployment orders right now deserves to know that their loved ones are being sent into one of the most volatile and dangerous situations American forces have faced in a generation. What makes this escalation even more infuriating and dangerous is that it is being driven not by honest intelligence or genuine diplomatic failure, but by a pattern of deliberate lies designed to manipulate markets and public opinion. Donald Trump stood before the country and claimed he had engaged in productive, promising conversations with Iran. He said the talks were going so well that Iran had essentially agreed to a 10-day pause on any American strikes against Iranian civilian energy infrastructure. He talked about gifts and presents being exchanged as though he were describing a holiday party rather than a war negotiation. And then Iran spoke. Iranian officials came out and flatly, unambiguously denied every single element of Trump's account. They said there were no communications. They said there were no negotiations. They said there was no 10-day agreement of any kind. Then, the Pakistani mediators, the very intermediaries Trump claimed were facilitating these breakthrough conversations, issued their own statement saying Iran had agreed to nothing, requested nothing, and communicated nothing resembling what Trump described. What Iran has actually communicated through proper back channels is a list of threshold conditions so significant that they represent a fundamental restructuring of American presence in the entire region. Iran wants full reparations. They want every American military base removed from Arab nations. They want their ballistic missile program left completely intact. They want permanent binding security guarantees from both the United States and Israel. And they want control over the Strait of Hormuz. These are not the demands of a country looking to negotiate. These are the demands of a country that believes, with good reason, that it is winning. While the war rages overseas and the lies pile up at home, the American economy is absorbing devastating blow after devastating blow, and the financial damage is becoming impossible to ignore or explain away. When this week opened, Trump attempted what traders and analysts call jawboning the market, essentially using false or misleading statements to artificially move financial instruments in a desired direction. Initially, it worked to a degree. Oil was surging, markets were trembling, and Trump came out with suggestions of a peace breakthrough that temporarily calmed investor panic. But as the lies unraveled, the markets followed. The S&P 500 lost approximately $1 trillion in market cap in a single day, and since the start of what the Trump administration is calling this military operation, total market losses have reached $3.5 trillion. Bitcoin is falling, gold is falling. The 10-year Treasury note yield is climbing toward 4.42%, and analysts believe it could push toward 5%, which would be catastrophic for borrowing costs across the entire economy. Mortgage rates have hit a fresh 7-month high, now sitting above 7%, pricing millions of ordinary Americans out of homeownership entirely. Most alarming of all, markets are now beginning to price in the possibility of interest rate hikes, a complete reversal from the rate cut environment that existed just months ago. This is not normal market volatility. This is the systematic economic destruction of American financial stability driven by an illegal, unnecessary, and catastrophically mismanaged war. While the nation's attention has been consumed by the overseas theater, something deeply alarming happened on American soil that has received a fraction of the coverage it deserves. Between March 9th and March 15th, Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, one of the most sensitive military installations in the entire United States and the home base of the B-52 nuclear-capable bomber fleet, was breached multiple times by sophisticated, coordinated drone swarms. Let that sink in. The base that houses America's nuclear-armed long-range bombers was penetrated by unknown drones, and most Americans never heard about it. Each wave of these drones consisted of 12 to 15 individual unmanned aerial systems. They flew with their lights on, deliberately making themselves visible, almost as if sending a message. Each wave loitered over the base for approximately 4 hours, an extraordinary operational duration that no commercially available drone system can achieve. These drones were resistant to electronic jamming. They operated on non-commercial signal frequencies. They demonstrated range and coordination capabilities that analysts say exceed anything seen deployed by Russia or Ukraine and appear to go beyond known Iranian drone technology, strongly suggesting possible Chinese involvement in their design or manufacture. Local residents reported hearing explosions during the incursions, which base officials dismissed as routine weapons testing. Barksdale, incredibly, has no dedicated air defense system to protect the aircraft housed there. This was the second breach of a sensitive American military installation in 2 weeks. Had this occurred during a Democratic administration, it would have dominated every news cycle for months. As the troop buildup accelerates, the Pentagon has moved beyond defensive positioning and is actively drawing up plans for offensive seizure operations inside Iranian territorial waters and on Iranian-controlled islands. The most significant target being discussed is Karg Island, a small but strategically monumental piece of land in the Persian Gulf that handles approximately 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. Pentagon planners have developed options ranging from a full military capture of the island to a bombing campaign designed to completely obliterate its infrastructure. Either option would represent an act of war so profound it would almost certainly trigger a full regional conflagration. Additionally, American military planners are examining the seizure of Abu Musa, an Iranian-controlled island positioned in the eastern Persian Gulf near the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz, situated roughly 40 miles from both Iran and the United Arab Emirates. The strategic logic is straightforward. Control those islands, and you theoretically control Iran's ability to threaten oil tanker traffic through the strait. But the operational reality is far more complicated and far more deadly. Iran has been anticipating exactly this kind of operation. Iranian forces have been mining the waters around these islands. They have been building trenches and fortified positions. Senior Iranian generals have publicly asked what logic suggests that American ground forces could succeed where American air power has not. These are not empty words. These are the statements of a military that has spent 20 years preparing for this exact scenario. Iran's military readiness is not a bluff, and the evidence emerging from the region makes that abundantly clear. Iranian officials have stated publicly and repeatedly that they have 1 million soldiers prepared and willing to fight. Iranian senior commanders have been explicit about the fact that they have spent the better part of 2 decades specifically preparing for an American ground invasion, studying American tactics, identifying American vulnerabilities, and building asymmetric capabilities designed to maximize American casualties while minimizing their own exposure. The Strait of Hormuz is now heavily mined. Islands are fortified. Proxy forces across the region, including Shia militias in Iraq and Hezbollah networks across multiple countries, remain activated and operational. Meanwhile, Iran's economic position has actually strengthened since the war began. Before hostilities, Iran was exporting approximately 1.1 million barrels of oil per day at around $47 per barrel. Now they are exporting 1.5 million barrels per day at approximately $120 per barrel, with American sanctions removed. Russia is actively resupplying Iran through the Caspian Sea. China's vessels, operating under Iranian supervision through the strait, are believed by many analysts to be carrying weapons and equipment as well. 13 American military bases across the region have been effectively evacuated due to sustained drone attacks using FPV drones and what fighters call jihad drones. Iran is not losing this war. By every measurable metric available, Iran is winning it. Perhaps the most underreported strategic crisis of this entire conflict is the rate at which American and Israeli munitions stockpiles are being depleted. Military analysts and defense officials have acknowledged that the pace of interceptor usage, particularly missile defense interceptors, has burned through what would normally represent 3 to 8 years' worth of reserves in a matter of weeks. This was entirely predictable. Experts warned before the first strike was ever launched that sustained operations against a country like Iran, with its massive drone and missile production capacity backed by Russian and Chinese industrial support, would drain American munitions at an unsustainable rate. That prediction has come true. Israel faces the same crisis. IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir delivered a stark warning in a security cabinet meeting, stating that Israeli forces have been stretched dangerously thin, that reserve call-ups need to be expanded to 450,000 personnel, and that the IDF, as currently constituted, may be approaching a point of operational collapse. This is the Israeli military, one of the most capable and well-equipped fighting forces on earth, warning that it cannot sustain the current operational tempo. Arab coalition partners supported by the United States are facing identical shortages. And throughout all of this, Donald Trump has spent his time attacking NATO, dismissing British aircraft carriers as toys, praising Vladimir Putin, and sending his vice president to Hungary to prop up Viktor Orban ahead of upcoming elections, while Russia uses Iranian proxies to target American service members across the region. What we are witnessing is not simply a policy failure. It is not simply an intelligence breakdown or a diplomatic miscalculation. What is happening right now, in real time, is the result of reckless leadership making consequential decisions based on ego, on lies, and on a fundamental misunderstanding of the enemy they chose to engage. American families are terrified. Military families are receiving deployment orders for their sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, husbands and wives, and they do not understand why. They were promised that the Iranian people would rise up and celebrate American forces. That has not happened. They were promised short, decisive action. What they got was an escalating, draining, catastrophically expensive war with no defined objective, no exit strategy, and no honest accounting of the cost in lives or dollars. The financial damage is in the trillions. The munition stockpiles are depleted. The IDF is warning of collapse. Drone swarms are breaching nuclear bases on American soil. And the response from the top is to send 10,000 more troops into a region where the enemy has spent 2 decades waiting for them. We will keep reporting this. We will keep telling the truth, because these are real lives, real families, and a real country that deserves real leadership and honest answers. Stay informed, stay engaged, and hold every single person responsible for this disaster accountable.